Hi, I'm Christy Smythe with the Business of Business. I'm talking to Andy Hirschfeld, a freelance writer in New York. Hi, Andy.
Hi, how are you?
Andy has written some pieces for us, and he's also written for OZY, which it's OZY, right? That's okay. Which has been kind of the media scandal du jour, very interesting. And he is one of the few people who's come out in defense of OZY on Twitter. Andy, what makes you think that OZY is legit?
Well, just to be clear, I'm not defending OZY. I'm defending the journalists who work there, because as any media company operates, there are obviously the audience development, the executives, and then the writers, reporters, editors, and producers. Some of which are full time and some of which are freelancers, like me. So I don't know if framing as a defender of OZY as a whole is entirely accurate.
Okay. You talked about how you think that there has been readership and engagement, even though there's been questions about the data. What makes you think that there were people reading and engaging with your stories?
Well, I was getting emails. I was getting reader emails. I was getting PR pitches. I saw conversations about the pieces in the comment section. Obviously, that's always a mixed area in and of itself.
Right, trolls, right?
Trolls, not necessarily the gauge of the caliber of readership that you would otherwise want. But I've also met people in person that have told me anecdotally that they are readers, some of which I met independently. So the audience, if the reporting is accurate, which it very well may be, that doesn't mean that it's a pretty far jump to say, this claim of millions of readers to zero. It's a pretty big jump. So there is a readership, and I can tell you that from an anecdotal level. So that's kind of been what I've experienced.
Right. Okay. What kind of stories were you doing for them?
That's a good question. It was a pretty wide variety of stories. I've touched the kind of creator economy, a couple different news literacy related stories, which is a big issue right now. I've done stories on infrastructure and housing, and I pulled in some pretty big interviews with them, which is hard to do for a publication that apparently doesn't have any readership. Marty McCary, who was in the White House. I interviewed Ben Carson, who was the HUD secretary, both of which for that outlet. So the questions about audience, and I think one of the big issues here is the way that the conversation on Twitter with the bigger digital media kind of apparatus, it kind of jumps from this kind of blanket generalization from something to nothing. And that's why I felt like I should speak up, because the questions of the questionable poor, the allegations of poor management decisions at an upper level versus the decisions and the reporting that editors at various levels of producers, of writers, and reporters, when it comes to outlets like when Vice seems to think, hey, let's lay off people every 6 months, or the all the stuff that happened with Deadspin or Bustle, or insert name of digital media publication.
Out there, yeah.
yeah, and to lump the decisions of the people on the top as if everybody involved with the company and its products are colluding with each other or are in some way. I've been in freelancer meetings, and there are hundreds of people in that meeting who are just freelancers, people like me who pitch articles, write those articles, and have relationships with dozens of other publications, as do I. So the concern that I have is a lot less about the conversation about audience and more about lumping these kind of two groups together, and why OZY seems to be this kind of exception to the rule for members of the digital media community to stand by writers and say, hey, upper management is making some terrible decisions, but solidarity with the journalists. And as somebody who's done some reporting for them, and reporting that I'm proud of and that has had impact, I find that personally, I don't know, hurtful, offensive, and it's hurtful to, and it hurts the importance of the stories that we're told. And I cite this story about the troubled teen industry I did. I've written quite a few pieces on that, but the nature of that kind of story involves people that are opening up about things that are incredibly touchy, that are incredibly personal, violating details of systematic abuse that happened to them as children. And opening up those wounds is not fun. And if you're going to do that, most people, if they're going to do that, are going to do it so that they can get the message out. And if the digital media community is saying, hey, this story doesn't matter, it really puts them down. And at the end of the day, that's why we do this, to tell stories, to illuminate injustices and be the voice of the voiceless. And if you have an audience of 25 people versus an audience of 25 million people, as long as the story is getting out there and it's being told and it's being amplified, that's what's ultimately important, right?
For journalists, yes, absolutely. For people in your position or other freelancers, I think people investing millions of dollars, if they're doing it based on faulty information, we don't know yet, but whatever those allegations are, that's the kind of thing people go to prison for. So when you first learn these allegations in the New York Times, what was your reaction? Did you feel betrayed?
Well, first off, I am not really willing to comment on the specifics.
Sure.
I always had a level of pleasant surprise when I heard that someone was a reader of OZY. So, going back to that, like, when I overheard people talking about that they were OZY readers, I wouldn't have been like, oh, if I was a writer for the New York Times, I wouldn't have been like, oh, I overheard two people in the park talking about how they were New York Times readers. Like, that's not exactly a, notable anecdote. So to suggest that from my kind of gut feeling, to suggest that there should be that I would be caught off guard by an answer like that would it's clear that there's a little bit of a fishiness here, either way.
Yeah. Okay. Are you going to continue to write for them?
I intend to. Obviously, I may want to take a little bit of a step back from this. But when it comes to the caliber of the journalism and the relationships with the editors and that I work with there, I think those relationships are fundamentally important, and the work that they do individually is pretty strong.